Epik Mellon podcast, conversations with the real humans behind broadband networks, cybersecurity, and the future of communications. Brought to you by QA Cafe. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 27 of the Epik Mellon podcast. So I just had Jeremy Brown on, which
Okay.
was a year ago,
Year
right?
ago.
And I'm not
Okay.
doing this coincidentally, just having you were my first, right? I'm not trying to do it on purpose to repeat everybody exactly a year later, but it's basically exactly a year later.
It's funny. It's been a year. Wow, that's crazy to think about, Jason.
Yeah, yeah, 27
Wow,
episodes.
that's
Yeah,
pretty good. That's impressive.
yeah.
Congrats to you. I can't stick with anything for 27 episodes. Netflix has cut
I
everything
didn't
down
think
to
that
eight
I could
episodes.
do that either.
It's impressive.
Yeah, this is my therapy.
Okay. Yeah, there's no way I could stick to it. I can barely get through 8 episodes of a Netflix show, let alone 27 of a podcast. I'm listening to your podcast as a listener. I can do podcasts, but I definitely couldn't produce them. So you're doing better than I would
No,
then.
no, it's you're gonna line them up and line them up. Sometimes it's been right down to the wire too, right? Like, and we're like,
Yeah.
okay, it's coming out Tuesday. It is currently Thursday.
Been there.
Anyway, uh, obviously Tim and I both work for QA Cafe. Tim is our CTO. If you haven't met him before and listened to the very first episode of this podcast, you can learn a lot about him. But disclaimer: even though we represent QA Cafe and its ownership, we are not. Our opinions are our own, regardless of the fact. And your lawyers can argue about it later.
We have the same lawyers, Jason, so that'll be fun. I
Damn
look
it.
forward to that argument.
I'm not going to go through our product spiel this time because the one thing I wanted to sort of convey as of as of this episode is things we're kind of shaking some things up around here. So I would be I would be I would be a little remiss to go into too much detail on all the stuff we have in our portfolio right now, other than obviously CD router, the industry standard test platform for broadband gateways and Wi-Fi devices that everybody knows and loves, Passport, CloudShark, and now our newest product, Packet Viewer, which we will get into in a minute. But yeah, that's the short and sweet version. So I'll save you all for my usual, I don't know, 30-second spiel. All you people who like fast forward ahead, you don't have to do that this time. Steve,
He
he
knows.
explicitly told me.
Yeah, he knows what's up.
At least he was honest about it. Anyway,
What speed do you listen to yourself on? I have to
I
speed
just
myself up.
just straight up, just straight up.
You do it straight up.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
I'm a,
unnerving. Like the pacing messes with my brain if I run it 1.5.
oh. See, I don't regular podcast I listen at one, but when I'm on it and I'm trying to listen to myself, I don't actually want to hear myself. So I go to like 2 or 1.5. I go to the chipmunk
See, that's the
version of
difference between
myself.
you and me, and why I can do podcasts is I love the
Yes.
sound of my own voice.
Oh, see, no, nope, nope, nope.
All right. So, like, a lot of stuff has happened over the last year, like a lot. And, I like to be sort of to the degree that we have plans and we can talk about them.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about how we are sort of shaking things up around here and sort of the things that we've learned in the past year. Just a lot about a lot of things. And we'll talk about some of your fantastic travels. And I see you're wearing your IPv6 shirt, which is also very appropriate.
I'm wearing this is one of my favorite shirts because it has the V6 packet on the back. So,
Oh,
so,
nice.
so sometimes I
That's a
go to
clever.
yeah. So sometimes I go to meetings and people are like standing behind me and they're like muttering to themselves and I don't know what. And then I realize that they're staring at the V6
They're like
package.
reading it out loud
Yeah.
to themselves.
Yes. That's how. Yes. Exactly. So yeah, I do love. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about those travels and what's going on in those spaces. But yeah, for the product stuff, we have a lot going on at QA, so it's exciting. There's some new stuff we're doing, and we always want to. I always want to talk about that stuff because it's way more interesting than stuff we've always
Well,
done.
I want to talk about I want to talk about Packet Viewer, but I also want to talk about sort of the journey
Mm,
of how we got there because we've had so many cool
yeah,
conversations that I think that everyday listeners in the outside world would find interesting about what we've learned about learning learning what people actually want and need from certain things,
yeah,
getting rid of our assumptions, right?
yeah. So I'll talk a little bit of kind of like where it was born. So when we've had CloudShark for quite some time, which for those who don't know is it's a analysis tool that allows you to upload your PCAPs You can throw them up on a web browser. It's great for group sharing. It's got other components, open source things built into it, like Zeek and Suricata are built into it, and it has all these features. One of the things we would constantly get asked about is people wanting to integrate it in different
Right.
ways.
Right.
And it wasn't really built for that out of the box, is how I would say this, right? It was,
No, it was always meant to be this standalone thing. And we
yeah,
sort of told people, like, okay, sure, we can try this and we can try this and we can try this. And eventually it was like, well, we can't try
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, I'm a realist, and I think most people are, and that viewing packets is not the only way you're going to solve a problem, right? And
Hmm.
so CloudShark has this interesting, or had this interesting um, trait about it, where people wanted to view packets in very particular circumstances, right? Like it's nobody wants to stare at 40 gigs of captures all the time, but definitely something happens on your network. You have an idea where it is, but the tools can't give you enough information, and you have to go look at the PCAPs. And
Right.
that's where people wanted that integration. And because we had this standalone tool, it was kind of difficult. Um, and that caused people a lot of like trying to, there was a lot of engineering around trying to, get it into products. And the world has changed. I mean, CloudShark is
Yeah.
9 years old, 9, 10
Oh,
now,
12.
I want to say.
More
Since,
than that.
I mean,
If you want, you
it's
want to
gone
talk
through
about when
some
we just started
changes
the
too. I
free
wasn't here
version,
for
right?
all of them, but
It was it
yeah.
was 2011, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it had gone, the world has changed outside for what people were looking for, standalone solutions as opposed to the network analysis world. So then we had this problem. We had people kind of struggling to integrate it, and we were like, okay, how can we do this in a better way? Is kind of where we started with. Was we had people coming to us. One of the other issues we've seen is packet captures, and the tools that are using captures are making captures very large.
Yeah.
And that, but originally, you could uploading them was not a scary thing. But now, when you're talking a data center machine or a machine running at 40 gig, you want to leave it on site, right? And the other thing we found was, the joy of people wanting to upload it, keeping it in a central place. That kind of, when you get into cloud environments, it was just way easier to leave it where it was for security
Right.
reasons. Like,
Right. Right. Right.
leave it in the cloud. I don't want to move it to someone else's cloud. I don't want to
Which,
just,
well, because that was the original problem that CloudTrack was trying to solve anyway. So
yes.
now, like, just taking it from one place to another is just not.
Right. So we started with kind of those two problems: is that people, the upload was causing people problems in security cases, or just in general, moving around large chunks of data is not particularly fun. So we kind of had that idea in mind, and then the other one we wanted to do is make it easier for people to integrate it in some way. And so what we started to talk to people about was, what features are you using? How are you using them? Um, how often are your people staring at PCAPs?
And
One,
as a result, we ended
yeah.
up learning like so much about what people actually use them for now, and
Yes.
the entire attitude of people towards packet captures, right? Because
Yeah.
it's we always call it as kind of an esoteric field, and like um, we ran into the situation where with CloudShark, we would have people who are champions of CloudShark at their organizations, but that's only because they are the people who understand the need of packet captures and how to look at them, which is not a lot of people.
No. So there were two things we found. One is that teamwork on captures was actually limited because of the amount of experts that were like really
Right.
good at it, that there weren't a ton of people who were using the team functions the way we thought. And the other thing we found out is we spent a lot of time on CloudShark trying to keep, I'll call it, fidelity is the wrong word, but like assuming that people would want to come back to a PCAP over and over and over again, like, and
Right.
trying to keep all this information. And what we found
Yeah.
from talking to people, that's not what they do. They want to open a PCAP, do as much research on it, and then they're throwing it away and moving on to the next problem. They have very little interest in being like, remember that PCAP from 2 weeks ago that we had, that
Right.
like, that totally not the way that people were using it. And so that was another discovery we had, that I just assumed that that was a feature that people were really into, or wanted. And what we found, that people were much more on the ethereal side of like, it's funny, ethereal. God, now I'm really dating.
You did just
The
date yourself
the
so
double,
hard.
yeah, the double meaning there. I aged myself while using the word. So we threw it
Cliff
out.
Stoll is Cliff Stoll is coming to your house right now with a Leyden jar.
Yes, yes, I owe him money. Um, so we did that, and what we found was that people were way more interested. Yes, they're doing things on the capture at the time, but there wasn't a ton of people who the way they were using it was to go back and look at something they had done 2 months ago. They had other tools and other mechanisms, logging or incident things that were much more higher level for that thing. But actually,
Right.
like getting the microscope out and needing to look at it was a rare occurrence.
But we also found out that all of them still wanted it to exist,
The,
which was
the,
this weird dichotomy of like, we hate it,
yes,
but
yeah. One thing, one person was like, we're trying to get rid of PCAPs. We're trying to get rid of them. We don't want them. We've been trying to do all these things. And I was like, okay, so you could go without them. And they were like, well, no, obviously not. We we have to have that. And I was like, well, there it is. Like there it is in a nutshell. Like people try to avoid it and try, but really that's the thing is it's still there. I look at it as kind of like the written word, right? Where the PCAPs are what happened, and sometimes you just have to go look at them, no matter how much parsing you have to rip through, and how much monitoring software you put in, all of this stuff. You at some point you have to go look and like where are the receipts, where are the things that actually I need to go see the things that were actually on the network. Tools make mistakes, that they're picking up the wrong things, they're getting confused, and you can go back and actually do the fidelity part of it and see like, nope,
right,
that we 100% mistook that, and here's where here's our problem. Whether it's a performance issue, most commonly, obviously, we find people are always hunting for security flaw, right? Flaws are where something generated from.
right,
Occasionally, there are a lot of we used to see a lot more performance inquiries. I think that has kind of died down a little bit with people using PCAPs for performance. They're really using other network measurement tools, but it still happens, right? People want to know why, and they figure out what link it is, and then they want to look at what's happening on the link. So that's where we
right,
become the
right, right.
microscope.
And it's interesting because as I do talk about shaking stuff up around here in terms of the one thing we always try to do here, right, and like QACFA's area of expertise, I feel, is providing providing good user interfaces to stuff like this, right? And that's the thing that I always think about when it comes to packet captures, but a lot of other things too. And we wrote about this is like when the tools when the things that are summarizing things, or when we start going down the huge AI route of things that are like really just trying are the things that literally tell you what's wrong for you are still going to be wrong. Like at some point, people still have to look at stuff.
I, it falls into the trust but verify category where like you're using those tools, but occasionally you want to make sure that like, hey, is this really what I think it is? And that's where the PCAPs come in. There's definitely a human trust issue we run into with a lot of network and security analysts where they trust their tools so far, but then they're like, I just want to see it for myself.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where the
That's
PCAP viewing will
I
always
feel
come in,
that
I think.
it's a very
Yeah.
human thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we're in an age now where almost everyone is the AI thing. We've switched over to the other side. We're very almost too dubious now of some of the things that we're using it for. I think
Right,
that's natural, and we'll constantly be having that wave
right,
about how much time will solve that. We'll
right.
get used to where it works well and where we're a little uneasy knowing that it'll give us incorrect data, I guess.
So long story short, that's what we learned, and that's the reason why effectively what we've done with Packet Viewer is rip out the core concepts of what we had in CloudShark and have now built it into components that people could use in something else, right?
Yeah, the biggest thing we did is there's a couple things we did. One is we moved it, tried it closer to you. So for the individual users, making integrations easier. We made the UI before we kind of like it was totally separate. You had to have your own server running. The biggest change we've made with Packet Viewer is we allow you to grab these individual UI components and throw them in your dashboard however you want. We think some people will use it the way that we use it, in the sense that they'll string it together. But we broke it down this time into ways that people can just grab. If you really love your ladder diagrams and you don't want to do anything else, you could just grab the ladder diagrams.
That's me.
Yeah, I mean everybody's right.
That's
Yeah,
where I go
I
first.
see everybody's, and that's what we wanted to give. We wanted to actually give the companies we're working with that choice because
Right.
they know their users better than we do. And if we start them all on a packet, this goes to the novice users that aren't PCAP experts. Starting them at a
Right.
list of PCAPs is a nasty
Right.
business. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think there are experts, or if you that's your user experience and that's what they want, you're going to start there. But I also think this gives you options for how you want people to navigate around and how they want to use it. And the other big thing, we've been hearing from a lot of people is, again, the data transfer. This one is supposed to bring it closer to you so that you can manage the traffic, keep it where you want,
Yeah.
hook it up to your
Right.
S3 cloud bucket and go crazy and just hook these things up and be able to look at your packets.
Right. 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 Without having to download it, which is the same problem that had always existed before, right? Because now there's copies of things that contain everything,
Yeah. Yeah,
everything.
exactly. Yeah, I mean that was one of the big things we definitely heard from people. There's no, this is for people who build an application and have a little download button, and people are taking the PCAPs off. And there's two things about that. One is the security thing, right? That I think
Hmm.
everybody gets, that hey, you're taking sensitive data. If you have the key logs in there, your TLS session is not helpful. If your PCAP is
Oh yeah,
loaded,
and for the people who don't understand what we're talking about, right? Because
yeah,
we're diving pretty deep, like
yeah,
because the actual packet captures are very very, like I said, it's a very esoteric thing. But it's a very core part of networking, right? Um, I don't think that people fully grasp that when you take a packet capture, it literally has everything that happened, right?
yeah.
So the files that were transferred can all be reconstructed. Every conversation can be reconstructed, right? And if it's secured, that's great. But like you said, if you still have, access to the
Yeah, and
keylogs,
you don't want people downloading it, right? In general, it's one of
right?
those things that you want to avoid. So that was something that we saw a huge benefit in, is that people could just go and get rid of the. And the other thing was is keeping them inside of your dashboard. This is a common one, right?
Right.
As a person who hates having 9,000 tabs or 9,000 apps open, more tools is not more fun. I can tell you that,
No, it's not.
right?
It's
And
not.
so
It's
what?
like every single time that I have to take another step to do something is a
Yeah.
exponential drop in the likelihood that I'm going to do it.
Yes, it definitely causing more friction is bad, right? And so
Yeah.
one of the things we got from people too was that is that hey, we can just incorporate this into our product and make the experience way easier. If with the download button, they have to go get Wireshark, they have to keep Wireshark up. Every time I
Keep it up to date.
obviously, yeah, as somebody who doesn't use Wireshark very often, when I am in a situation where I'm not online and I have to fire up Wireshark, every time it pops up oh, I have an update. I would like to update. And I'm like, like that's exactly the stuff I don't want to be doing, right? And that's the thing you're asking users to do. And then in definitely going to the novice thing again, what we found was that
Mhm.
people wanted to give them a pre-done experience where if they don't
Right.
have, they're grabbing default Wireshark settings, which if you're looking at a SIP packet, good luck, right?
Right.
If you're looking at voice traffic, static default Wireshark captures are not helpful. So
No, no, it's true. It,
yeah,
it it comes back to the conversation that I've continuously had over the last few episodes of the skills gap, right? And it's like we really need tools to fill that hole for a while, and it needs to be made in a way that is conducive to absolute newbies. And it's okay, right? But it's like you said, it's all about context.
yeah, I think it's almost like where you start them, and this is where we want to give people the ability to kind of curate the experience they want their users to have with PCAPs. Whether it is like, yes, we know our users know PCAPs, we're going to drop them in the deep end and let them go swimming, or if it's a user where you expect like, hey, they're not going to necessarily know what this is, but we're going to give them some filters and some ladder diagrams and let them easily pair out the stuff they don't care about. Like, oh, they think they have an IPv6 issue. Like, we make it really easy for them to get rid of all the other traffic so they can just stare at their V6
Tim,
traffic.
there's no
No,
issues with
none.
IPv6.
Works great.
If people had just deployed it the first
It,
time,
it,
everything would be fine.
it's everywhere, Jason. It's everywhere. I'm sure it's fine.
So speaking of which,
Yeah.
you just got back from Australia.
I did. I went to IETF. What was that? I was wearing the shirt yesterday. 119? 119. It's 100 and
Cool.
it was cool. There's a lot going on in the IETF and the general IETF space. They're very busy with Quick right now. In particular, finding the most unique ways to send as much stuff, media, everything over Quick now. I think that's a really fascinating space. And then on the V6 side, we're um, Always trying to up deployment. I think we're up to, I think the last statistics I saw from AppNic and Google was like 40, over 40% now deployment. Um,
Okay.
oh, yeah,
Okay.
it's a lot less. I will say this, it's a lot less conversations about transition mechanisms. I don't miss those days of,
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Is like, in what
yeah.
context does that mean? Is that totally native? 40%.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's hard to tell. I'm going to be honest. Sometimes it's hard to tell. We have a lot, we've seen a lot more V6 only deployments for a variety of reasons. Some of them is necessity. The thing we always said was going to happen has happened in that we're run out of V4 public space. And then it's
Not
hard
if
to
some
get
people
it.
can help it.
Yeah, well, yes, there's that. But on the other side, the thing is it's not easy to get. And it becomes
Right.
painful. It becomes painful for the apps. It's more equipment if you're running CGN. So we have V6 only deployments that way. We've seen them. And the other thing that was really helpful, honestly, was the mobile space. The mobile space
Really
embracing, yeah, them embracing V6 on the 5G and 3G side made some concepts like X4 XLAT is one that was the Android built into their boxes, and then um, Apple uses it in iOS, and then Windows just announced they're putting their CCLAT into the next version of Windows. And I think that is a case where it was used in the mobile environment, and then we were like, hey, this isn't that bad. Maybe we can apply it other places. And so that was really helpful because that was V6 only because they could control
Watch
that
out,
whole.
3GPP. Their heads are already big enough.
It's true. It's true. But they proved that hey, you can get away with doing V4 not natively and still it won't break you. So we've seen a lot more of those types of using DNS 6.4 and doing some DNS tricks has kind of helped deployment that way, and that you're no
And to
longer
to
stuck.
explain the transition mechanisms thing for a minute, what that really means is that, so what people have been trying to do for a number of years in various capacities with varying degrees of success is making it so that IPv4 networks and IPv6 networks work together, right?
Yeah.
IPv4 being, if you've ever seen your little four dotted address that gets translated into into an actual URL and stuff like that. You guys have seen it on your computers, right? Um, it's probably, you probably see it as a private address space, so 192.168 something. That's all IPv4, and it wasn't very big. And IPv6 is so astronomically larger of an address space that it's hard. It's like being in the total perspective vortex in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah. Well, which one? I've done the grain of sands. Let me do the all the V4 addresses fit in a golf ball, and all the V6 addresses fit in the sun. Like
Yeah,
to give you an idea here.
right, right, yeah. It's like, what is it? You could have, I don't know, the number of IPv4 entire internets that you can have is
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just wild
like,
in that way. Yeah, and
but
so
so long story short, people have been trying to get them to interoperate for a while so that it wasn't quite as painful of a shift, because it's not just a technological problem, it's also a people problem and an expertise problem and
yeah, tools
diagnosing
problem.
problems and knowing how to look at packet captures and.
Yeah, I mean, all of that went into it, right? And they weren't backwards compatible for very good reasons, right? That they don't magically work together. And when I first, for years, transition mechanisms meant to people actually transitioning V6 islands. So you were trying to make two V6 things be able to talk to each other over V4 infrastructure. We have crossed over the sun. We're on the other
Yeah,
side of the sun now,
I
and we're
remember you were
totally,
saying that. Yeah,
yeah, we're totally now on the side where it's like, hey, we have V6, we have V4 pockets in the world that we're trying to make sure V6 things can talk to, which is not where we were a
right.
while ago. So that's been good. There's also been things like Matter have gone over V6. So
Hmm.
we're seeing, I'll say, technologies that are not native networking
That was a big
technologies.
throwdown. That was a
Yeah,
big throwdown.
well, I mean, from their perspective, if you talk to those guys, right, it was just easier for them to have one surface. Like IP is
Yeah,
not their, it's not their bailiwick. Who was the other one I talked to? The marine people, NMEA. They're doing like networking over boats, right? A
right.
very
Yeah,
niche network, and they were like, we don't want to have to deal with trying to tell people how to address V6 and V4. We're just going to do V6. And I think that's where you're headed, where people who don't, in these niche networks that are out there, they don't want to have to deal with two addressing schemes. It's just not worth it. And then the next question is, well, now it's got to bridge itself over. How can we make that easy? Like we already have enough trouble bridging. Can we just get away with leaving the IP layer and actually, and that's kind of where we're at today. And Matter, things like Matter have been very helpful in that deployment case, and that we're trying to get it's simpler for them. It simplifies their world, and then simplifies. It gives onus to, hey, we have to actually have V6
It only took
support.
25 to 30 years.
I honestly, I'll say this: when I started, right, it was totally in labs, and I actually wasn't sure it was ever gonna leave a lab. And then I saw it leave a lab, and then I was like, oh, this will be easy. And then there was a point where I actually thought deployment was going to speed up, and then I quickly realized all of it's so much stuff. It's the firewalls, it's the load balancers, and that's the thing. Every
No,
time you,
and what's crazy about it, and what you got, what we ended up doing back at the IOL, at least with the plug fests and
mm,
the events, the other big events. Dave Tott said quoted somebody that really hit me, right, and it immediately made me think of IPv6. It was um, uh, the designers of the aircraft have to be on the floor when they start building them, right? And if
yeah,
you don't do that, right? There's also because they can write it down on paper all they want, right? And but
yeah,
then you immediately have a layer of translation between the spec and the build. And if
yeah.
there's those two people aren't talking right away, you're gonna, you end up having a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I also think like we wrote things. The a funny thing to think about is like Slack was written before DHCP, like before
Oh
DHCP.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
you end up in really weird cases where like, hey, I don't think we were in the situation we were in now, which I think we finally gotten past, but we got into this situation because we designed something before it was really deployed. This goes to your point, right? And then we later deployed it, but then DHCP v4 had everyone had decided like that was the way to get options out to host. And you just have to wonder like if that order had been different and DHCP4 had been everywhere, we wouldn't be in the Slack. Now Slack has a lot of benefits to it, but we wouldn't be in the mess that enterprises and other people don't understand how to do
Right,
Slack. To your training issue, they don't understand how to address their networks in V6 because it's different than it is in V4, and you have
right.
to kind of think about that. So that's it's all been good. V6. Every time we solve a new problem, we did home gateways for a while. That was a big initiative, obviously close to our hearts at QA because we spend so much time doing that. I think the next big area the IETF has been trying to tackle is enterprises. They
Mhm.
suffer a lot of problems from just learning how to address their networks and trying to understand. You have to go to Aaron and ask for a public address space if you want to
Oh
do
yeah,
this. Like it's just they're like, what do you mean? Can't I just use ULAs? And it's like trying to explain to them that you don't want to put an at 66 in
yeah,
there. You're literally going to reintroduce all of these problems. Like, what can we do here? How can we lessen it? Can we do stateless translation? Like, if you really want to hide your addresses or have other reasons. But sometimes it's just explaining to them, like, here's the application. You just have to apply for a space. You get it's. I promise this is an easy process, and you can get a space, and then you can do this, and you'll be fine. But it's not. It's so different than V4, and so that's
yeah.
where we're running into enterprises, and then it goes to just their tooling, right? You're asking them to figure out all these things that they mastered over a very long period of time for tracking things in V4 is now you've got it. And then you're to the issue of now you've doubled their work because there's two attack
Right.
surfaces.
Well, right, right, right. Oh, right, right, right. So on the registration side, is that eventually going to be kind of a bottleneck? Like, is there any bottleneck to having this still be centrally managed?
No, there's no bottleneck there except for it's very intimidating to people, right?
Yeah.
It's an intimidating process to go to whatever your regional Aaron or AppNic or LACNet or whoever they are, your region who's giving out addresses. It looks really intimidating. Like you're registering with them, you have to tell them what you're using it for. It's like it looks intimidating. And again, it's just not a process. You can't turn to someone in your organization and be like, hey, what do we do for this app last time? It's like, well, we didn't apply for any V4. We just magically we used 192 private
Yeah.
addresses and
Right, right, right,
trying to get them to understand that hey, these are publicly routable, and then the security guy freaks out, right? Because
right.
then he's
Well,
immediately I
you know, oh, NAT network ad for those of you who have seen that 192 to 168 number, right?
Yeah.
What's happening is that that address is getting translated into a single address when it goes out to the internet, right? And that has some weird features that are actually accidents that became really nice and people got very used to.
I,
But they're not featured. Like they're not. That was never meant to be.
no, and I'll say this: I always call them habits. I think people got in a lot
Yeah.
of they're just habits that people were like, oh, no one can see my address, no one can, and they're habitual or network habits that weren't necessarily. And then you have to think about it and be like, okay, how can I solve this? I mean, obviously there's two tussles to this, right? Application developers do not want NATs because then they have to build in things to know when you're a peer, an actual peer next to them, or when
Mhm.
you're out
Oh
in
yeah, there's a thousand
space.
band-aids that had to be made for that,
Yeah,
right?
yes. And basically asking people to recreate it for, the other day, someone at the IETF, one in Australia, they were suggesting a twist on an experimental thing that was stateless NAT. 66, which is basically you take an internal address that you don't get a public address space. You just choose one, and then as it goes out your NAT, it switches the addresses to the public ones, right? So it's a one-to-one mapping. There's no crazy thing. But to be completely honest, the three OS vendors got up the app side of things and were like, please don't do this. Like literally in a row. It was Android, Apple, and Windows were like, don't do this, right?
Wow.
And this is because they're on that side of it where
Right.
they're like, look, I don't want to think about this. You gave me a window. I think of it, you gave me hope that my app developers would not have to sit there and figure out.
Oh, it was also the whole point.
I mean, yes, having all this address space and returning end-to-end connectivity was a point. I think there's a little bit of a tussle here that we're going to have to work out as a community about when to do some of these things, because I understand the other part of it is that then you're tied to a service. If you're getting your address from a service provider, you're tied to them. If you don't go get your own, like again, there's just some of this is, I think, just education. Like you and me talking about it, I'm sure there are a lot of people who had no idea that's how you're supposed to do that. And so I think that's the tussle we're having with V6 now. It's trying to help enterprises. The thing about them too is there's more of them. There's a ton more. Like when we went to do V6 for operators, if you think about it, there's not. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of operators, but there's not is the amount of enterprises versus the number of operators. We could find the operators and make documentation to teach them this is how you deploy V6 and home gateways. We
Right.
have it's much harder to find enterprises that way and how you get to them. And so that's kind
Right.
of what we've been going through.
One of the things I was thinking about, because I think last time when we talked, hold on, I'm going to try and find a picture right now that I want to bring up. But before I do that, while I'm doing that, um, the when we last talked, it had been how many in person had you been back to a year ago since COVID?
Let's see. I've been back. I'd have to look at the list. I want to say I've been back, I think, for 2 years. So I think I've been to 7 or 8 of these now, the IETF. Their
Yeah.
attendance almost bounced back to normal as of last summer. So the last summer was Prague, and it was back to the pre-COVID numbers. Australia was a little low, but I think that had a lot to do with travel,
Yeah, yeah.
less so
Oh, well,
than,
I was going to ask about that too, because like it sucks.
well,
It sucks that it's like it sucks not to travel there, but it sucks for Australians, right? That it is so hard to get there because
so
the whole point of us doing these in-person events is so that everybody's on the same schedule and we all get to meet with each other and all that
yes,
stuff, right? And they have so many good companies, good engineers out there, right?
they do. I got to meet a couple. I met a couple of QA Cafe users, CD router users that I had no chance of ever meeting. What's funny is talking to them, they're like, "Oh, 8 hour flight, that's nothing," because they live in a place where if you have to get anywhere, it's an 8 hour flight, right? Like they don't
Yeah. Oh,
they
that's
don't.
so funny.
Yeah, I just never thought about it. And he's like, "Well,
I
that's
never thought
nothing."
about that either. That's like my wife, right? Like the first time we ever went out to, because half her family lives in Oklahoma City and the other half lived in Albuquerque, right? And so driving from Albuquerque to Oklahoma City was like just a
A
regular
normal
thing
thing.
that they did all the time. And like around here, we're like 20 minutes.
No, it's funny. I lived in Maryland, but I spent a lot of time up in Massachusetts and at camps and then at college later, right? And a 10-hour drive, I don't blink at for the same reason, right? Like when people around here are like, oh, 2 hours. I'm like, dude, I did 10 hours. Same thing. I don't think about it. But I had never dawned on me for people in Australia that they don't think twice about it because they're on that island and they have to, 8 hours is if they're going anywhere, they're at least doing one 8 hour jump. Also, every time I stare at a globe, Jason, I think I understand where things are located. And then I talk to someone and and they tell me how long their flight is. And I'm like, I don't understand. How, like, what? I thought India was, someone was like
Yeah,
telling me that their flight from Bangladesh was the same amount as mine from San Francisco to Australia. And my brain was like, what? Like, no, that can't be right.
surely not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
things like that
wow,
that make the other thing that was weird
the
for me
world's
is
big.
Singapore was a longer flight than Australia by far. 4 more hours on a plane to get to Singapore than it was to get to Brisbane.
Was it because like from the same
Yeah,
location, or
from
was it
San
because you had to
Francisco.
hop
Yeah.
weirdly? Yeah,
Yeah,
weird.
I don't understand it. So the
Huh.
obviously Australia, I think Europe gets hurt there is probably the biggest hurter because in the ITF goes through this. You have this with the broadband forum too, right? That there are regions where you're clearly going to have down when it's the full flight around. I get stuck sometimes. My debate is not going to these things. Like Australia was definitely one. I was like, oh, that's a long flight. But then I had to present. I think I'm writing I'm writing 4 drafts. So I had like 3 presentations, and I was like, I do not want to be doing 3 a.m. presentation.
No,
Like that's the other side of it. Like I always advocate for going to these things. I think the side meetings, just picking up side conversations is worth. I tell everybody who's like on the fence, like the side conversations and learning and all of that is
it
great.
absolutely is. It
Yes.
absolutely is. We just got back from the the spring broadband forum meeting,
Mm.
right? And it was just amazing how like at least two more companies joined the broadband forum just because they got to hang out with us, right?
It's the hanging out thing. I also say all the new ideas before they're at, you
Yeah,
see it the first time, like in an official draft or presentation. Those all happen before, like, hey, someone comes in and is like, hey, I was thinking about this problem, and you're like, oh, somebody already, Ted over there, he's thinking about that same problem. Like, you should go talk to him. And so there's a lot of that going on.
yeah.
And so, but on the flip side for me, it's I don't want to be presenting in a dark room at 4 a.m.
No, I
to
did it one time
Australia.
and I was like, I'm all set.
I,
But then I feel bad, right? Because on the flip side, they have to do that all the time, right?
Yeah, I think it's just, the IETF has done a really great job with the remote stuff. It's way better than it was. And some of that they had already started before COVID, and COVID just, I would say, accelerated it, that you can get a very good experience. They did a really good job with doing the queuing system where everybody, when you're in the room, you still have the same, you have a little app and you click a button to get in
Oh
line.
yeah,
Yeah, so we're all
yeah.
in the same lines because for a long time, when we first started, that was chaotic at best, right? Like,
Oh,
is
because
the
you're trying to
online,
interleave the actual microphone versus
you
the
got it.
yeah.
Yeah. So stuff like that the IETF has done a really good job at resolving that way. So the remote experience is really good. I get that not everyone can go to every meeting, but we're basically back is how I will say it. I do think, global economy always messes with these things with companies' travel policies, but the IETF seems to be back mostly with the global stuff. They put out a bunch of statistics at the last meeting and had some really interesting things. You know, the thing that surprised me, Jason, and I think you'll appreciate this, people still want to use email to communicate the most. And they tried to ask that question like 4 different ways. They tried Slack. They tried to engage every demographic in every different way. And the guy, the Jay Daly, the IETF chair, was basically like, "We tried. I don't have an explanation other than people told us unequivocally that email is the way." And I was like,
That's interesting
"Wow!" Like,
because I hate email.
I know you do, which is what I immediately thought of you because you hate email. So this is where I do know you. This is where I'm not the regular podcast guest, but I thought of you instantly, and I was like, wow. So email still has a place. And then it was, some of it I do think is the interrupt thing with chat, and the IETF is not people's primary.
I know,
It's not
I
people's
know,
primary
and I
job.
suffer from it. Yeah,
We all do, right? And for me, I would feel differently if it was my job. Like if my job was to stare at internet drafts all the time, I might vote for chat, but it's not. And so email is a preferred way for me to track things. And hey, I have 45 minutes to go read through whatever it is, and you go and you do it. And so maybe that's why. I also think a lot of it is the translation too. Is that
that's
being
actually a really good point. Yeah,
being a global organization, you're not necessarily. One of the more intimidating things that came out of that survey was the language barrier for a lot of people can be
Yeah.
intimidating, depending on the area
It's
you're from.
I can't even imagine. Like,
I know.
and again, that's one place where we are very privileged. It's like I could never ever give a presentation in another language, let alone Chinese, let alone write a spec in Chinese. Like,
Yeah, yeah, and so I think the IETF is always thinking about those things, but I do think email has gotten to the point where you can write an email, translate it, and be
right,
pretty close, and at least exchange ideas through that
right.
mechanism.
Huh. Yeah. Cool. Cool. So I couldn't find the picture. I was looking for the koala picture.
Oh, yeah, I got to touch a koala. That was fun. It was, dude. It's been a while. I went to they had a sanctuary there, which is always cool, right? Because it's not quite a zoo. It's like they're rehabbing the animals, so
Right.
you feel
Right.
a little bit better about those situations. They had like
It's not
100.
like they're on display, right? It's like, yeah.
Yeah, there's 130 koalas at this place. It was the Lone Pine Sanctuary. If you're in Brisbane, I totally recommend it. But it was crazy. It'd been a while since I've been in a place where every animal I saw was new to me. Like, because they're all in Australia, right? I'm like staring at the koalas. I'm staring at the kangaroos. The all of those animals. I got to see a platypus. They have this crazy room where it's inverted. So they set the room up, and the platypuses were grown up in a place where it's dark during the day and um, dark during the day, and then at night it was day for them, right? So we could see
Oh,
them.
interesting.
So you could actually see them because they're nocturnal. So it was
Right.
crazy. He was just hanging out, like swimming all over the place super fast. And
Oh,
if it had been normal, I would have had no chance to. I mean, the fifth grade Tim's platypus report was super excited about what I got to see when I was there.
I like that you remember that.
Oh, I did. I could totally. I bet you if I ask my dad, he has it. I bet you it's on some because I was so proud of that one. It was that and the whale. I think the next year I had to do the whale report, and I used Star Trek 4. I used the whale sounds from Star Trek 4. Those are my two big animal reports that
Hmm.
everybody has to do in elementary school, right? It's like a rite of
Right.
passage. Like pick your animal and write 9,000 words about it.
The other cool, it's the other cool thing I've been experiencing recently. Not to go down the rabbit hole of talking just about Australia, but have you watched Bluey, the kids show?
Okay, so my kids are a little too
Because
old for it, but
Donovan's too old. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I do have a wife who's teaches preschool. So I am
Yes.
obviously, oh, she has to be up on the latest things, Jason. So
Right,
Bluey
right.
is obviously, and he was
It
crazy
is
in
the
Australia.
most brilliant show
Yeah.
that's ever been made for kids. Like totally brilliant, right? All of the lessons are super like emotional learning and that kind of stuff, right? But what's interesting about it is that we start to absorb it's all Australian culture, right? So we're starting to like absorb it and like Saoirse is absorbing the accent sometimes and like she stopped calling me daddy. She just calls me dad because they call dad, right? And
Yeah.
mom,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It was everywhere there too. It wasn't like it's just a transfer. It was very clear. I saw it multiple places on screens everywhere.
It's extraordinarily popular.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was.
But I love it. It's entertaining, and there's enough lessons and jokes in there for adults that you can watch it. There's an entire episode that Disney almost didn't want to air. There's a couple that they were a little weird about. There's an entire episode where obviously the mom and the dad are hungover.
Oh.
They're like
Oh.
laying on the floor, and they mention that they just went to a New Year's Eve party and they don't want to do anything, and the kids want to play on them. So
You've been there, Jason. I hear that.
yeah.
Yeah, I hear that.
So it's very easy to identify
Yeah, okay.
with
That's
Bluey.
cool. I'll have to go look for that one.
Oh, anyway, so I don't know. The only other stuff I really wanted to catch up on that about stuff in the last year was just about us really thinking about the things that were kind of shake up here in terms
Yeah.
of in the future
So yeah, we definitely talked about packet
about user
viewer.
interfaces, and like how we're going to be how we need to present both test information and network information to people in the future. You know, getting those newbies to be able to interact with stuff safely. It's all the stuff that we've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing we've been thinking about in general, like for all of our products, whether it's Passport, CD Router, or Packet Viewer, now Packet Viewer and CloudShark, is definitely how approachable is the word I like to use, how
Yeah.
approachable it is for people.
Right.
Whether
Totally.
it's CD router and, hey, I got to do this certification or this USP thing or this purple thing, whatever it is, how hard is it for a new person to be able to pick it up and do it? And sometimes that's even hard for us to see, and that's what we're trying to work on. We're trying to talk to
Right.
as
Right.
many customers. We've been using it forever, and we're like, oh no, you just do this, this, and this, right? And it's like sometimes you got to take that step back. I often joke like sometimes it's good to just watch new people use your thing, and then just have your eyes open and not react. My favorite, we had a customer recently. We had a customer come to us who had just started using it, and they were like, "Oh, let me show my screen," and I watched them do the task, and I was a bit like, "Wow, never would have
It's like
thought
watching
to."
your parents try to use Word.
It sort of is, but it's not bad. It's just different. And I'm like, oh, maybe we should think about this problem a little bit differently. I'm definitely from like I said, my main goal is to make things, and I think this is a company thing, is make them more approachable for people. And whether
No,
that
it
is,
is. That's such a great term because it's exactly what it is.
yeah,
Because we have no idea who you are.
yeah,
We have no idea who you are, what your skill level is, what your immediate assumptions are about the stuff that you see. And so making this extraordinarily complicated stuff more accessible is
yeah.
that's what we're good at around here. We're
Yeah,
very
and
passionate about it.
it's been fun too. We love solving the network problems. We love the home space. That's not a space that's getting less interesting. It's getting more interesting by what people are doing. So we
Yeah.
really enjoy that. That's been fun. And I know we talked mostly about packet analysis, but on the test tool side, there's plenty of stuff going on in the home space that we really enjoy. We're definitely not just hanging out doing the same stuff we were doing 10 years ago. It's an evolving
Right.
space, which I think we all enjoy that part of it as well.
Oh yeah. Evolving in ways again that are mostly invisible to the layman. But,
Yeah.
you know, it's like we've always talked about how it's not people don't necessarily know that for the longest time every single router has their own operating system, right? It might be embedded Linux, but it's their own version of it, right? And and now that's not really the case.
It's a
And
changing world,
operate
right? Yeah.
yeah.
No, I actually think there's a lot more commonality in CPE operating systems than there ever was in my lifetime, probably, right?
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, between RDK references, Purple OS references, and even just using OpenWRT, I think the last surveys I saw, the number of proprietary ones is like way down as base OSs. I mean, I do think people have found this is sort of falling, I think, a little bit into the Linux camp now, right? Where like most servers are Unix based slash Linux based underneath the hood. I think that's what's happening with CPEs is there's some version of OpenWRT, RDKB, whatever it is, base reference platforms under there, and then people are finding that there's still plenty of things that users want, differentiators, things that make their solution unique that you can do on top of that without. But it's very different space that way, and
Yeah,
I think that's going to be continue to happen. I think it's a change for the operators because they can no longer know exactly what they're getting when they're getting it. Right? I think there's a lot of
right.
when you're getting it problems nowadays. Like
Oh,
before,
interesting.
you could ask somebody like, when exactly is Wi-Fi 7 going to be supported in the product, and people would be like, oh, it'll be this date, right? Like whoever your provider is. Now it's like, hey, when is OpenWRT going to support Wi-Fi 7? You don't get the same answer because you can't.
Well, but see, this is the same. It's the same thing we run into in standards. It's like actually,
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife about this last night because she was working for a volunteer organization,
Mm.
and she's running into there the same situations that we run into, where people were like, "Oh, you know what would be a really great idea if somebody did this," and we're like, you could do that.
Yeah. No.
So
It,
it's like, when is Wi-Fi 7 going to be supported? I don't know. You
but
could dedicate some resources.
But see, go the other way. Before they did get an answer to that. As an operator,
Hmm.
you were paying somebody for something, and you could be like, "When's Wi-Fi 7 on your roadmap?" Asking an open source community for a roadmap
Right.
is like, this is just a change. I don't think it's bad. I just think it's
No, it's
one of
not. Yeah.
they just have to adjust. There's an adjustment period for everybody here, where it's like you can no longer ask someone when you're going to get something because it's a little bit murkier, and that's an adjustment. And there's tons of benefits, right? Like, hey, that thing, group think, group support, all those are great, but there's
Right.
definitely some. I'm sure next year when I'm back on here, that's going to actually be one of the topics that if you're going to have me back. If If Jason invites me back, I think that'll be one of the things we're going
Oh,
to end up talking about is that what's happened in that space is going to be really interesting. I
right.
think, again, it's stealing stuff from other places in the apps running on CPEs. I think that'll be, they're borrowing ideas, and I just don't know how much use they're going to get in the
Hmm.
home market.
Hmm.
So it'll be cool to see. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It makes it so our lives are exciting
Keeps us busy, that's for sure, Jason.
in a really, really weird way.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, dude.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks for coming on again. Yeah.
Anytime.
To hit that home. It's like we are excited about these things because we're huge nerds. So by all means, please do subscribe. Um, if either on YouTube, especially YouTube. I know YouTube is kind of a pain in the butt sometimes, but that's where we put the majority of these things. And above all, own the nerdy things that you love, like we do, and have fun doing them. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Jason.